Right, morning everyone. We'll make a start. I'm not Mark Aldred and I'm not Guy Harkin, but they've both sent their apologies. So I'm Roger Jones from Salford. I'm chairing the meeting this morning. Chair's announcements. I've got a few announcements to make. The first one, we ought to record our thanks to John Lamont, who, as you know, is leaving. I think we're quite jealous. He's off to Australia, but we want to thank him, obviously, for all the work he's done over the years for transport. And we ought to also announce that the Combined Authority at the last meeting agreed that Eamon Boylan, who's the Chief Executive of the Combined Authority, that he would be taking over that role on an interim basis for the next 6 months, while the John Lamont's post is advertised and filled. So that was a decision made by the Combined Authority. Also, the other thing I wanted to mention is we've had a recent announcement about tram fares, which I'll be honest with you, I know nothing about other than what I've read in the press. So I think we ought to ask officers to ensure we get a report to the next Metrolink committee. Doreen, do you want to say something about that?
Yes, I'd welcome that, Chairman, because we're hearing things from GMCA that, as chair of the Metrolink and Rail Committee, I know nothing about. So, yes, I would welcome a report. Can I also say I reiterate your comments about John Lamont and thank him for all the work he's done. Thank you.
Okay, everybody happy with that? The only other announcement is about the National Transport Awards. We sometimes go and we don't win anything. This time we've managed to win on 2 awards. One, the City Region Transport Authority of the Year, which is quite a prestigious award, so we're obviously delighted with that. And the further award, which I'll pass round, is the Excellence in Cycling and Walking for the joint scheme with Manchester City Council for Wilmslow Road and Oxford Road, which the award is here, and we'll pass it round, but I think we ought to minute that and congratulate everybody involved in those schemes. Is that agreed? Okay, item 2 is declarations of interest, which has been passed round. Item 3, minutes of the meeting held on the... Oh, by the way, apologies, I should have said. I've had apologies for Rishi Shorey from Bury, Angelique Stoja from Manchester, Valerie Leach from Oldham, Neil Emmett from Rochdale, Mark Aldred and Eunice Smithers from Wigan. And Guy Harkin from Bolton. Are there any other apologies? Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Michael Cordingley from Trafford. Yes. Any other apologies? John Leach is coming. Oh, well, let's get this meeting over as quickly as possible. Okay. Sorry. Minutes of the... Sorry, I can't do it for laughing. Right. Minutes of the meeting held on the 14th of September. Are those agreed as a correct record? Okay. Item 4 is minutes of the TFGMC subcommittees. A is capital projects and policy. Any comments or questions? B is bus network and TFGM services on the 5th of October. Any comments or questions? C is Metrolink and rail network of the 26th of October. Yes, Eddie and then Dave.
Thank you, Chair. In a minute, it does say a member raised some concerns around Metrolink users not giving up priority seats for those who needed one, and I was the member who raised the issue. Yet again this morning, coming in on the Metrolink tram, packed because it was rush hour. That's life, and we want more, and they're in the process over a period of time of getting more carriages and so on. But lots of people are standing. You've got these priority seats marked quite clearly, and I actually felt like asking some of the very young and obviously fit young men and women who were sitting in these priority seats and were not noticeably pregnant. Could have asked the men if they were pregnant or if they had a disability or they had other reasons why they needed the seats. I didn't do that, and I just stood, and there were people in more needs of the seat than me, who was standing. And that's the case constantly. So the signs just mostly don't work. Sometimes they do, but mostly they don't work. So in a discussion at the subcommittee, the Metrolink operator did take the issue seriously. They talked about trying to do more in the new year, when there's going to be a number of changes, as we know, in relation to the Metrolink trams. He talked about the Please Offer Me a Seat initiative, which was publicised a couple of months ago, and that's fine. But actually, how many people do want to wear a badge or a sticker going around saying, you know, please give me a seat? There is an issue there, isn't there? I mean, I'm not against anyone who feels they want to do that, but many people who would benefit from a seat wouldn't want to do that. So I did raise the issue about regular on-board announcements, and they said they hadn't thought of that, and they thought that would be a good idea, because it's a question of it's nudge theory, isn't it? It's putting a bit of pressure on people. They've got their headphones on, they're buried in their whatever they're doing, reading or so on. They're desperate not, but they know what they're doing. They're desperate not to catch the eye of someone who quite obviously does need the seat more than them. You see that all the time. And I just think that it's civil, decent behaviour. We need to encourage that. It's difficult to police it, obviously, but I think we should do everything we can to make it better for people who do need those seats to be able to sit down when people who can manage without sitting down can stand up. And having said that, there are many, many young people who do stand up, you see that, and who do offer their seats, but often they don't. Thank you.
Okay, before I ask officers to respond, David, you wanted to raise... Yeah,
thanks, Mr Chairman. Can I... This morning I caught a train from West Auckland, which is the 717 from Southport to Alderley Edge. It was short-formed with 2 carriages instead of its normal 4. So between West Auckland and Bolton Station, before we got to Salford Crescent, we must have left something like 100 plus passengers standing on platforms, because it was just a physical impossibility for people to actually shoo themselves into the carriages, because they were absolutely jam full. Now, then, to add insult to injury, the train then sat waiting outside Deansgate Station. I'm not exaggerating when I say it, for 10 minutes. And it was almost when the 10 minutes was up before somebody on the train announced that we were waiting for the path to clear down to Piccadilly, and that's why we were sat outside Deansgate. So that meant this morning there will be 100 plus passengers who will be late for work. Now, clearly, we've had all sorts of excuses for Northern, and as far as I'm concerned, the excuses are wearing pretty thin, and somebody really needs to sort Northern out. They either need to string them or kick their arse or something. So can I ask, or is it feasible, possible, for somebody to bring a report to the next Metrolink and Rail subcommittee of the information regarding short-falling trains? Because, I get regular correspondence. When I stand on the station, people approach me, and I know one of our MPs in Bolton, Sir David Crosby, is one of his hobby horses is the short formation of the rail, the line up to Blackburn and Clitheroe, and that's not acceptable. So we really need to get to grips.
Okay, Phil.
Thanks, Chair. You went through the minutes a bit too fast for me. I wanted to raise something on the minutes from the last meeting in relation to the presentation we had from James Baldwin. I raised the concerns about the concessionary passes, if we could review it and possibly look at bringing them in before 9:30 in the morning. We're getting a lot of residents who are missing, like I said last time, hospital appointments and other appointments because they can't get to the places before 9:30.
Just on that latter point, Phil, I think we'll ask officers if they'll report back to the next policy committee, in terms of concessionary passes. And I think, David, if you're happy, Doreen, we'll refer what David has said to your committee for consideration. Okay. Have you got any points on the issues Eddie's raised on the trams?
I think it's fair to say we'll get fed up of asking people to make that seat vacant. We are doing a campaign starting in January about enforcing the bylaws around Metrolink, so taking a bit more harder line, and items such as that, whilst to be a softer approach, will be factored into it.
Eddie, I think we'll have to keep it under review. I think that's the point, because I think we all agree with the point you're making. It's just how we deal with the matter. Are there any other questions on Metrolink and rail? Okay, can we move on to item 5, which is Greater Manchester Transport Strategy 2040? I think Nicola's going to take us through this report.
Good morning, thank you, Chair. So this report is a progress report on our 2040 5-year delivery plan. So if you remember, we published our 2040 strategy back in 2017 in February, and at the same time we published a 5-year delivery plan which set out all our short-term ambitions for the things we wanted to deliver in the near term. And we also committed to come back and reporting progress on that so that we can give greater visibility on the things that we are delivering, where there may have been delays to the programme, and how we're performing against a series of key performance indicators. So I'm really pleased that we can bring this report to you today for approval. And I guess as a reminder that GMCA is the body that's responsible for monitoring the performance of the LTPs, so it's important to get your input to it and your approval of the report before we publish it, hopefully in the next month or so. So just to give you a very quick overview of what's in the document which has been circulated, it starts with an update on some of the big agendas that have been shifting since we published our report, and some of the work we've been doing on some major policy areas such as clean air, the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework, which we discussed at the last committee meeting, on congestion deal, our local industrial strategy, bus reform, a whole range of policy areas where we've been doing a lot of work, either influencing or developing our own plans for publication. So that really sets the scene and some of the context that we've been working within since our delivery plan was published. Chapter 3 then gives an update on our capital programme and where we are in delivering that, and a reminder that we've delivered around £425 million worth of capital improvements to the transport network over the past 2 years, so we have been making significant progress on that. It gives a brief overview of the Highways England and Network Rails programmes and how they're performing, and flags some of the delays to Network Rails programmes, which we continue to lobby and to work closely with them to try to address. And it also talks about some of our revenue-funded activities, so areas like Travel Safe Partnership, the range of good work we're doing on travel choices, cycle training, and so on, and gives you some idea of some of the activity and some of the outcomes from that. So we've got around 87 new businesses, for example, who've signed up to our business network and who we're working with actively to influence the behaviour of their employees. And then finally, we've highlighted a few case studies. So we've brought out some of the big schemes that have been delivered over this period. So the Oxford Road Corridor scheme is one example, which we were lucky to win an award at the National Transport Awards recently. Ordsall Cord, some of the progress on SBNI programme. And also the A6 Manchester Airport Relief Road, which just recently opened. So a reminder of some of the good progress that we've made over the last year or so. And then finally, Chapter 6 sets out performance against our key performance indicators. It's a little bit difficult over such a short time period to really draw any major conclusions from that, but you can see good progress on a number of our KPIs. A few areas to watch around road safety, and we obviously also continue to monitor growth in traffic on our roads, most of which is actually associated with population increases as the city region grows rapidly. And then finally, in Chapter 7, flags that we are in the process of preparing a new delivery plan, which will be published alongside the spatial framework in the coming weeks. And that will set out a refreshed delivery plan to support the scale of growth in the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework. So I'm hoping that gives you a bit of an overview of what's in the progress report. Very happy to take comments and questions.
Thanks for that, Nicola. Warren?
I'm sorry. The paragraph I refer to is headed, on behalf of Greater Manchester Combined Authority, the TFGM is currently preparing an assessment of proposed bus franchising scheme for Greater Manchester. Where are we up to with that? When do we expect that to be completed?
Chair, shall I answer that? The work is following a prescribed process laid down by government. It is now at an advanced stage, and we are hoping that in the new year we'll be able to give the Mayor and the Combined Authority a complete timeline around the issue. We are aware that members have a degree of frustration with the pace of the process, but I think it's important to bear in mind that Greater Manchester is the first location which is looking to go through a process laid down by brand new legislation, and therefore it takes longer than perhaps people may ideally want that process to follow. Clearly, I'm sure members will want to make sure that the final advice that TFGM brings forward is fully comprehensive, but critically also legally robust, and that's why it's important that we have the time to do the work fully.
Can you just define a little bit closer in the new year, please?
2019. I think we would hope that in the next in the first 2 to 3 months we can set out clearly where we are against the process. Yeah.
Okay, I've got councillors Adshead, Chadwick and Greedo, and then I'll take any more after that. I'll come back to you after. We'll do the next 3, I think. Councillor Adshead.
Right, thank you, Chair. Welcome the report. I think it's the first time I've seen one of these reports, so I think it's very well laid out. I think it's I did actually find it really interesting, and it's certainly one of the reports I won't simply bin when I get home. I'll assure you of that. I'll actually keep it, and there's some very interesting information that I'd actually like to thank yourselves and the other people involved in putting the information together there. And I look forward to updates in the when we get the next updates. It comes on a reasonably regular basis, I think, doesn't it? So I look forward to that. There's a couple of points I'd like to make. First one, actually on page 7, we're talking about the low carbon mobility there. And obviously we have the bus fleet, which actually all like to see really carbon neutral in that sense, and obviously electric. But one the other thing, of course, is trains. I mean, we've got some trains that are quite filthy. They're really old and dirty diesel ones. So, I mean, it's ironic, isn't it? We'll be asking people to sort of give up what's probably a relatively quite a good private vehicle, say on very low emissions, and get them to go onto a dirty diesel. You know, so I think it's that sort of thing, messages that we actually need to get out to people to probably try and use public transport more. But when that public transport itself isn't actually very environmentally friendly, it's sort of it makes that message a little bit harder for us to actually do that. Now, I'm sure you're working. I'm sure you'll tell me you're actually aware of this, and and actually, it'd be interesting to see how many diesel trains we've actually got to in place, and actually any sort of time scale, whether we're talking 5 years, 10 years, or it's noticeable whenever the government does something, and trains, they do bring some trains up north, they usually are diesel in that sense of it. So it's a bit ironic that they're probably getting nice electric ones down at London and then pushing the diesel ones up here, but that's actually a fairly familiar story. So appreciate your comments on that one, please. The other item I'd like to actually just raise is actually on page 44, a couple of points there. First one at the top of there about the potential reduction in public transport usage. Obviously, I know it's just a projection, but I'd like some idea of actually why, what the reasoning behind that actually is, if possible. And secondly, just a bit further down there, some points about the accident data there, which obviously it's quite good with tracking the data there. But would it be possible in future reports to possibly have that by user group? So whether it's a pedestrian, a cyclist, a car, taxi, that sort of thing. So we'd actually have that information. It'd actually be easy to understand where it is and actually what we as an authority can actually help with that sort of problem. Thank you.
fairly quick one. Morning, Simon. Can I, having said what I said previously, I'm quite upbeat about electrification. I see the situation where shortly, if we get a proper decent service on electrics, we will encourage more people to leave their cars at home, because it's, for me, it's a no-brainer. I don't want to drive and drive in Manchester stressed. Then have to find somewhere to park and have to pay, be rolled by Dick Turpin and well, a car park thing. But I am concerned that the Northern Hub seems to have disappeared. Seems to be put on a back burner, which is way down the road. Because what we've done is we've introduced another pinch point with the auto code, where we've now got a conflict of trains crossing across from Victoria and Piccadilly. That adds problems for commuters coming into Manchester. Recently I attended a meeting, and I think you were there, Claire, and I asked the guy from the Department of Transport, how far were we thinking about transport, and were we thinking about the purchase of extra carriages long term? Because if we get the success with electric trains, then clearly we're going to be back in the same predicament we're currently in with carriages. And the other thing is, you know, this would help with clean air. I mean, we've got this new clean air strategy, and you know, if we could get more people out of the damn cars and on trains, that would be a plus factor for everybody concerned. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councillor Greedo.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah. First of all, can I say we're genuinely pleased with the progress that's being made on the transport strategy. There are clearly some areas, in fact, that need, I think, need speeding up, certainly in terms of the clean air, and we have specific problems, as you know, in our area, indeed in Salford generally. So I'd like to see more progress on that between now and the next progress report. But I just want to raise one particular issue, and it was on page 29, reference CO501. And of course, the smart motorway project has been completed now after the usual delays that we find with this type of scheme. So a couple of questions. One is, when will we be getting the first review as to how this is actually operating? Because there are lots of concerns in different parts of the country about the way these smart motorways are operating and whether in fact they are actually reducing congestion. So it would be good to know when we will be having the first review so that we can see what effect it's actually having. And the second one, in fact, is that as I understand it, in fact, there was the hard shoulder was supposed to remain through the Worsty intersection. And as far as I can see, the hard shoulder hasn't remained, and therefore the traffic lanes are closer to the residential areas. And as we're already in, I think, one of the worst pollution areas in Europe, you know, that's not good news. So why has this been altered? Why have we, in fact, I mean, you've got a hatched area, which is probably about half the width of a hard shoulder, but nevertheless, the hard shoulder was supposed to remain in order to create more of a buffer between the motorway and therefore the pollution and the residential houses. So what's happened with that? Thank you.
We'll maybe split these between us. So just to say that we're proposing to bring back a progress report every year, and I think year on year, as we kind of get into the swing of producing these, we can bring you back kind of more refined information. So I think around the KPIs, I recognise that actually at a very high GM level, sometimes it doesn't give you all the information you want. So we'll look at splitting that out in a bit more detail. So certainly around road safety, I think public transport usage as well, because actually we're seeing very different trends on different parts of the public transport network. So Metrolink, for example, continues to increase patronage. It's been a slightly different story on bus, but it varies a lot across Greater Manchester. So we need to find a way of communicating the variations, and actually the same on the highway network. So we're seeing actually reductions in traffic on some parts of the highway network and big increases on other parts. So I think we'll look to sort of tell a more kind of nuanced story, I guess, around that as we continue to update these progress reports. I think that's one for the next progress report as well, around smart motorways, and can we start to report back on performance and work closely with Highways England to make sure we're getting some good feedback on how well smart motorways are performing. They are proposing to continue to roll out smart motorways right through the next spending period. So we need to really understand the impact and the benefits of those so that we can have confidence that that they're delivering real benefits for Greater Manchester residents. And certainly on clean air, the next progress report will have a lot more information on clean air. We'll clearly be publishing a lot more detail on our clean air plans early in 2019. So when we come back with our next progress report later in the year, we'll be able to provide a lot more information and a lot more detail on how we're progressing on tackling air pollution.
Just with regard to the Northern Hub, so members will be aware that there was a full planning process undertaken for a whole route improvement programme through the Castlefield corridor, extending from the proposal for 2 additional platforms at Manchester Piccadilly through a redesigned Oxford Road station. Those proposals have been through a full public inquiry, and the outcome of that, we understand, is still with the Department for Transport at present. Recently, we have been supporting the Mayor in pressing the Secretary of State on that particular matter. In parallel with that, there is additional work that's underway at the moment involving the TFGM rail team, Network Rail, train operators and others to look at the performance issues through the Castlefield corridor that were referred to by yourself, Councillor Chadwick, earlier, and the challenges that we have, because in effect at the moment we have part of the Northern Hub in place in the form of the Ordsall Chord, but we don't have the Castlefield corridor solutions in place to complement the hub. That's quite an urgent piece of work that's underway, and we're pressing to make sure that we've got some clear conclusions coming out of that work. Well, we hope as we come out of 2018 and go into 2019. I think the point's also very well made in terms of electrification. We continue to press on electrification, and the point's also very well made in terms of capacity, which is why we've previously brought early thinking to the committee in terms of the longer term use of tram-train technology to allow us to secure broader capacity benefits through the rail corridors. And when we bring the more detailed proposals in the 2040 delivery plan that Nicola referred to before, we're looking to move that debate around tram-train further forwards. We've been doing some very good work with Network Rail on that aspect in recent times. With regard to smart motorways evaluation, I think it's a very good point, and I've certainly not seen any evaluation report so far on the initial application of smart motorways. So we'll take that point away, Chair, and follow it up with Highways England so we can advise the committee when that will come out.
Okay, I've got Councillor Haslam, Councillor, Hops, that's right, isn't it? And then Councillor Burke, and then, hang on a minute, I'll let me do them 3 and I'll come back, because I know Robin wants to come back, and Councillor Finney, so we'll do those 3 first. Councillor Haslam.
Thank you, Chair. It's about the Northern Rail franchise, page 17. I do feel that, Councillor Chadwick and everyone else has expressed so much concern about the operation of Northern, and I think it was a bit bad at the last Transport, the subcommittee, the Rail and Metrolinx, when there was no representative from Northern Trains present. And I really do think, we should try and ask them to attend the meeting so we can express our concerns. But there's no mention in this Northern update, and it was a key part of the franchise agreement, was the Northern Connect service, which does, if it does come to fruition, gives a lot of benefits to the Bolton services, to the Rochdale service and others within the county. And I'd like to know, are we on time with the Northern Connect service? The second point I've got is the page 31, which is the Salford Central station, which, I mean, Salford Central is a very useful station, in fact, more useful for the city centre of Manchester than Victoria. And it just says that, you know, phased delivery of the new platforms from 2019. Do we know when it will be completed, and do we know when the Liverpool services will be calling at Salford Central? And the third point I've got is on page 28, the lengthening of platforms, which is obviously very essential. But they're talking about lengthening Diddle station platforms. I didn't know Diddle had a station at present. There's no, and I didn't know there was any proposal for reinstating it. So if I could have some elucidation on that, I'd be very grateful. Thank you.
You can't be asking questions like that. Councillor Hopp.
Thank you, Chair. I very much welcome this report. It's good to see some meat on the bones after the initial 2040 strategy was announced, particularly like the table that's given of the delivery plan of the various different schemes. On page 27 of the schemes, under the global connectivity, it's mentioned about the Western Gateway Infrastructure Scheme. It's mentioned in the context of Port Salford. This not only will improve access to the development on Port Salford, but it's also will alleviate the congestion that's on the M60, particularly over the Barton Bridge between Salford and Trafford. And anybody who travels over clockwise around the M60 between about 3 o'clock and 7 o'clock on a weekday evening will know exactly what I'm talking about. I just wondered where this WIGUS was up to. I keep hearing it mentioned. It says in the report that the exact requirements have yet to be defined. Congestion doesn't seem to be. I travel regularly between Sale, where I live, and see family in Bolton, and the congestion doesn't seem to be alleviated at all. I know we've got that lifting bridge on over the Ship Canal now, and I know we've got a smart motorway, but I echo Councillor Garrido's comments. I don't actually see what improvements the smart motorway has brought along, as congestion seems to be just as bad, and it took me an hour and a half the other week to get from Sale to Bolton at about 6 o'clock. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Burt.
Thanks, Chair. On page 37, the key route network packages, and in relation to the bus priority lanes, it's great that we're getting the more bus priority lanes, but smaller authorities like ourselves can't... Small authorities like ourselves can't fund to put the ANPR cameras, the CCTV cameras, into the lanes, so it makes a mockery of having all these bus lanes around the towns outside Manchester. You're guaranteed, if you go in the bus lane in the city centre or near to the city centre, you're guaranteed to get a bus lane ticket, but out in the sticks like ourselves, them lanes are just being used by Tom, Dick and Harry, to be honest. They're not worth having unless we can get some form of help in putting the ANPR cameras in.
I'll ask officers to deal with those, but Councillor Hobbs, can I just say, I don't need the officers on one issue. I met with Highways England about 3 weeks ago, and I asked them the very questions that you asked about the WIGUS scheme and about any other infrastructure that was due in Greater Manchester on the motorways. They told me, you know, they have their own way of describing how they do work, and they said that the stage that we're at now was stage 0. I said, well, that doesn't sound very far advanced, stage 0, does it? But they're moving on, and they said that by the end of next year, they're hoping to look at all the relevant schemes and have some public consultation. So that's in about 14 months from now. But in the meantime, whatever schemes they are proposing, there was no prospect of any completions in the next 5 years. So unless Simon can say something different, I'm telling you now that their timetable says that whatever schemes they go ahead with, they'll consult publicly, they'll come back and make decisions. They need to get back to government, they've got to get government approval, but that process cannot take less than the 4 years-ish. 3 to 4 years, and then of course they've got to start on the scheme, so there's going to be no completions certainly for the next 5 years unless Simon knows better than that.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and you sort of went from 5 years to 3 years there. I I agree with you that there are real challenges at the moment in terms of reaching a final agreement with regard to the Salford Central platforms, but nonetheless, we are convinced that Salford Central platforms can deliver a range of benefits. They deliver important economic link benefits for the wider city centre. So, as members are all very familiar, around Salford Central Station now we have spinning fields on the Manchester side of the river. We've got major redevelopments on the Salford side of the river, and it's a major commuter destination now within the city centre. So we remain convinced that it's the right solution for the city centre. We also are increasingly convinced that Salford Central platforms can help to deal with some of the rail congestion problems that we're now seeing through the corridor generally, but principally at Manchester Victoria. And so we do think there's a way through this, and we are working very actively with Network Rail at the moment to make sure that we can make good use of the growth deal funding that we secured for that particular initiative. Northern Connect, I'm afraid I'm not directly familiar with, and I'm just checking with colleagues around the table likewise. So we're going to take that issue away for you, Councillor, and just properly understand it with the Northern stakeholder team. And with regard to Diggle, I can only thank the Councillor for proof checking our report for us, because clearly Diggle has appeared in there in error, and I won't go back to the Diggle. I won't go back to the Diggle Station campaign for the moment, if members are okay with that. With regard to Wiggis, yes, we're doing further work at the moment with both Salford and Trafford councils to understand what is now the set of priorities within Wiggis. As members will be aware, as Port Salford has continued to develop, the proposals have refined, and therefore there are different elements that fall certainly into the highways elements of Wiggis. And of course, we remain committed to work with the rail industry and the City Council to deliver the freight rail link off the rail corridor, recognising that it may be that we need to allow a little bit more of the transport for the North work on Manchester-Liverpool corridor options to progress before we can properly resolve that particular issue. And as the councillor points out, the issues around Wiggis are of course directly linked to how do we deal with the whole northwest quadrant around the M60 motorway, and Nicola and her team are working really quite intensively at the moment with Highways England and Transport for the North to try to ensure that we get the right outcomes from the piece of work on the M60 Northwest Quadrant, so that it doesn't only give us very long-term proposals for that section of the highway system, but nearer-term proposals that allow us to unlock the potential of Port Salford. And clearly crucial to that is resolving what else do we need in terms of ship canal crossings over time, because the point's very well made that at the moment a number of interventions are held back by the fact that the Barton Bridge is the only viable ship canal crossing at the moment.
Okay,
bus lane enforcement, sorry, Chair. I think that the point's well made, and certainly we'll revisit with the issue with your officers, Councillor. Clearly, we need to try to make sure that we can deal with the revenue issues that are associated with making best use of capital investment that we have around the transport system. As members of the committee will be well aware, revenue funding and capital funding in transport planning doesn't always come together very easily, and I think it's a good example that's been made there. So let us take that away and see what else we can do to try and help the local authority in that regard.
Okay, I've got Councillor Finney, and I think Councillor Greedo wanted to come back. Yes, I'll take those two, and then I'll come back to you again.
Thank you, Chair. I really appreciate this document. Just brilliant to see everything laid out. Can I just comment that on page 31, sadly, C0601 Stockport Station, we don't have a progress update. I appreciate probably nothing's happening at the minute, but we have, somebody could comment on that. Page 17, there is reference to Northern's problems, and we have reference to delays due to driver training. I just would like an update to maybe, are the drivers now trained, or is that still holding things up? On page 25, we have talking bus stops. Could somebody just explain a little bit more detail what it actually means? And on page 42, measuring success, there's reference to the bus stop, page 42, level 4, the access to public transport services, the population having greater than level 4 accessibility. What does level 4 actually mean?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just referring back to the previous question, I don't actually think I got an answer about the hard shoulder, unless I missed it. Also, in terms of the review, can we put some sort of timescale on that? In other words, is it likely to be after 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, or 12 months?
Just, Councillor Sullivan, did you want to raise something?
I was just admiring the wonderful trophy. Yes, it was page 43, the security, personal security in public transport. I'm absolutely amazed at the number. I might be misreading this in some way, but it's gone up by 2 from 27 to 29. And I'm sure on the Piccadilly to Rochdale route alone, they must have that number a day. Remember, it goes through Oldham. I won't comment because I have my colleague here. But I just can't believe that number. Are those just reported by staff? And if they are, how do... I mean, I've seen plenty of incidents, but when you get off, you just go, don't you? You don't stop and report them. There should be somebody handing out forms like they do up on Piccadilly Station.
Yep, I'll maybe just take those in reverse order. So that's incidents per million public transport trips. So it's a calculation to show that, so that we can actually put it in relation to the number of trips that are being made on the network. So I agree that we probably need to show both. We need to show the absolute numbers and the number per trip. And I think this is where we need to keep refining the KPIs and how we communicate them, because I agree that could be a bit misleading. On the level 4 access to public transport services, again, we need to communicate that more clearly. I agree. It's based on accessibility mapping that we use and shows where you have what we would consider a good level of public transport service, and then the population catchments that live within that. I think this could probably do with a map just to show what we mean by that and how that's been calculated. So I suggest that we try and improve that before we publish the report, just to make it a lot clearer for members of the public. And then on the Stockport Station master planning, there has been an enormous amount of activity on that, and apologies that the final detail hasn't gone into this version of the plan. We are working with Stockport just to agree the detail that we present, and in the final version that will be fully populated.
Shall I come back on the targeted bus stops first of all? Targeted bus stops was one initiative that we had within a number of smart city projects that we piloted recently in central Manchester. And the idea behind targeted bus stops is that they're a community point which benefits from quite a lot of cabling, and therefore the potential for us to use them as an internet access point. And so the idea was that we tried a number of different applications on the bus stops for different users. So for example, there are a couple of bus stops on the Oxford Road corridor at the moment where we've trialled with the RNIB smartphone access so that the bus stop talks to a visually impaired user through their mobile phone to give them information in terms of next buses that are arriving, but potentially also local access information around a bus stop. And we're writing up a report at the moment of this particular programme of activity. It was called the City Verve programme, which we worked on with the hospitals down the Oxford Road corridor and the universities and also the City Council. And I'd be happy, Chair, if you'd find it helpful at some point for me to bring a little bit more back on the programme in the round. On the M60 hard shoulder issue, as I recall at the time, the way in which the design was undertaken around hard shoulders was driven by an air quality assessment at different points along the corridor, and Highways England effectively had to demonstrate that they weren't introducing excessive levels of pollution by moving traffic any closer to adjacent neighbourhoods. So that was the approach that they took at the time. If Councillor Garrido find it helpful, I can follow up with Highways England to see if they can provide a little bit more specific information on that point. With regard to evaluation, well, I'll go away and ask them today, and as soon as I know what sort of programme they're working to, then I'll bring that back, but we'll be driven really by Highways England timescales rather than something that we can dictate.
Okay, let's try and make this the last round of questions, otherwise we are going to be here all day. I've got Councillor Bailey and I've got Councillor Burke. Is there anyone I've missed out? Councillor Sykes, you can sum up as always. Okay. Councillor Bailey.
Thank you,
Chair.
Chair.
I missed you. Councillor Robinson after, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. With relation to page 26, the smart parking, I think it's a really nice idea, but in reality, certainly providing infrastructure for that would be really expensive. I can't see how that would work in terms of individual bus stops, and it's a routine thing anyway for a lot of people to drive to tram or railway stations. So is this the idea that it'd be around stations or interchanges? Because you couldn't really have a system like that at individual bus stops. Is that the plan? Thank you.
Chair, I'd like to refer back to Councillor Sullivan in relation to the security on the public transport. It's alarming that you've put these figures into a document ready to be approved by this committee if it goes through. Now, what we need to ask is that we get the accurate information, because we all know ourselves, if we read certain newspapers throughout the year, they get the information from the Freedom of Information from TFGM. We don't want to leave ourselves wide open for publicising wrong information, especially on all the public transport networks. We know we've seen an increase in different assaults on buses, trams, trains, and we need to be crystal clear with the information going out and not just come up with figures in a report.
Okay. Councillor Robinson.
I think it's a great report. I'd like to pick up on W12 on page 28 first. You mentioned stage and platform lengthening, and one of the lines is Piccadilly to Hadfield. 7 of the stations on that line run through Tameside. So could you give us an idea of which platforms are being considered at which stations? And then on page 38, on the rail station improvement, tranche 6. If you'll forgive me, I'm hanging one on here. Northern Rail have just put 2 new platforms on each of the stations, platforms. It took them longer to do that than it did to construct the actual station when it was built in about 1985. But one of the new shelters, they're brilliant shelters, but they've taken 3 seats out to put a machine in. I welcome the ticket machine, but you know, what's the point of putting a bus shelter, platform shelter there with seats, and then put a machine in? Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Councillor Sykes.
Thanks, Chair. I'm not even going to attempt to sum that lot up. I'm going to make the points I wanted to stick my hand up for in the first place. Couple of things. It's on page 41, 42, 43, which is just the generality in terms of, and it's not necessarily a criticism of officers of transport for Greater Manchester, but it's just the gap we've got and actually how far we are behind in terms of doing something about public transport. So if you actually look at the stuff in terms of the performance indicators, you know, reduced congestion, we're going in the wrong direction. More reliable journey times, wrong direction. Resilient and well-maintained road networks, wrong direction. So it's all worse than last year. We're flatlining in a number of other places. Better access to services by the public, wrong direction. More people travelling actively, flatlining compared to previous years. You go over the page, on page 43, school journeys by walking and cycling. We're not making a dent in it at all, and we all know how important that is for our young people and generations and everything else. As looking around the table, most of us did some walking and cycling to school, although you might not believe it now, whereas most kids now don't. Improved safety and personal security. My two colleagues from Rochdale, you know, it's the Wild West on our Metrolink line, and don't call it anything else. We have, you know, I'm not even going to bring up what we want to do in Oldham about it. I want to talk to my colleagues in Rochdale first, but improved safety. You know, people killed on our road networks, worse than last time. Casualties per 100,000 population, worse than last time. Personal security on public transport, you know, wrong, higher than last time. Number of trips to travel Manchester Airport, flatlining. Sustainable modes of transport, you know, and then the other bit, and we've got a report later on, Chair, which is what I wanted to ask is, you know, we're going to have some proposals about reducing emissions of CO2 and NO2, and we've got no data either for last year or the year before. Yet that's going to be a key indicator that's going to drive some decisions that are going to be made about transport in our conurbation, or in fact already are, but there's no data in this report. So if you then follow that through in terms of what does that mean? Well, I'll tell you what it means in my ward. It means 1,000 jobs are relocating out of the northwest, out of Greater Manchester to the East Midlands because they're racked off with the road network, and that's shop direct, and they can't get the stuff in and out. So they're moving, lock, stock and barrel, 1,000 jobs. And most of those people actually don't live in my ward. They live in Rochdale and further afield. So that's 1,000 jobs because this, you know, with the most congested network outside London in the United Kingdom. And it's not something we should be proud of. And I'm not necessarily saying it's our fault. It's a bit of a wake-up call for government. But then you go and look at other issues. You look at Piccadilly, you know, and some, you know, I had the joys of catching a train from platform 13 to platform 14. It's like a zoo. It's not a good experience. We've got walkways that don't work. So if you're at all a bit dodgy on your feet or disabled or whatever, it's really difficult to use. You sit in an airport, you know, you sit in an open barn, you're crammed on and off, trains get cancelled, carriages get lost. You know, those old services, key to the connectivity of our region that come into platforms 13 and 14. You know, it's not something of the 21st century. It's like something out of the Stone Age. So, you know, and yet we've just had the government do another massive bailout for Crossrail because it's overspent. So, and the final point I just wanted to make, Chair, which there isn't in here, despite all the problems we've got on the Metrolink line, and it's the only deal in town for me, Rochdale's lucky enough to have a rail network as well, the car parks at the eastern end of our borough, Sean Crompton, Durker and Mumps, are now all full. So you're not going to drive people out of their cars and onto the tram if they can't find somewhere to park. And they regularly can't now. Not just, you know, you certainly can't park in Shaw much after 7:30 in the morning, similar at Durker, and just a little bit later at Mumps. So we're already encouraging people. So one of the things I think we need to look at is increasing capacity. We also need to look at a system that people who park there are people who are using that public transport system, not people who are taking advantage of free public parking. and the technology exists, and it's really not that expensive. And somebody just needs to join that up in terms of number recognition, software, and getting on the tram and whatever. It's not really that complicated. But none of that's in here. So in terms of us, in terms of the people I represent in Oldham, our one thing that's going to get people out of the cars, reduce air pollution, is already at capacity. Yet I see nothing in here that says you're going to do anything about increasing that capacity. And I think that's a massive omission. Thank you, Chair.
Right, well, thanks for cheering me up, Councillor Sykes. I feel a lot better after that contribution. Anyway, can I ask Nicola and Simon if they'll just try and summarise those points and anything else you might want to say?
Certainly. On the specifics, first of all, so with regard to smart parking, the particular initiative that it was applied to here was around car parking around the Oxford Road corridor. So one of the things that the university community had identified was that there was a lot of unnecessary local traffic congestion around the university with traffic circling, trying to find parking capacity across a series of different sites within the Oxford Road corridor. What we looked to do was to use Internet of Things technology to provide in-car information for travellers so that they could go to the most immediate parking space and thereby cut down the amount of circulating traffic within that area. And I think the technology through that initiative has proved itself that in locations where you've got very high demand like that, there is the potential to move on from the sort of countdown displays that we've tended to see around town centres and city centres. So I think there's something in it for us to do more with. With regards to the crime and disorder data, I suppose partly in defence of the team, first of all, the way in which they've reported the data so far is the agreed long-standing key performance indicator that we have used both through this committee and elsewhere over years. And what it looks to do is to try and place the issue of the frequency of incidents of crime and disorder in the context of the volume of travel that takes place around a public transport network. However, I do think the point is very well made that as committee members, when you then want to dive more deeply into the issue and understand, well, where do we take ourselves in terms of forward planning against the issue, clearly we then need to break the data open considerably more so that you're able to see that from a range of different perspectives, and we'll certainly take that point away. With regards to platform lengthening, it's slightly misleading, I suppose, in the way that the table's laid out. So ultimately, what we've said is one component of the rail plan going forwards is to look where we need to introduce additional platform lengthening. Actually, the activity that's recorded within that row in the table at the moment is about rolling stock lengthening, not platform lengthening. I think, Councillor Robinson, you're aware of the plans in that regard through the corridor. And the point with regard to platform shelters as well, Simon here, who's leading on our stations, is going to talk more about that later, has heard that point, so I'm sure he can take that away with the rail industry. And then with regard to the final sets of comments, I suppose one point that I ought to make from the outset is this particular document is intended to be the progress report. Separately, as Nicola referred to, we will shortly be bringing out an updated delivery plan which will set out, if you like, the other side of the coin. What is it that we now plan to do in order to address a number of the challenges that are set out in the progress report? So that will follow. It isn't that there's an absence of a plan. We just felt it was very important as members that you had the opportunity to consider the performance of the system before us then bringing forward the plans. I think in terms of the overall performance of the system, I think that there are a range of indicators that point to different issues. So there are some very positive elements of performance around our transport system, and at the centre of that, as Councillor Sykes points out, is the very rapid uptake in patronage across the Metrolink system. And Metrolink is no doubt showing the way in terms of what residents are looking for from a public transport system, and we've got to continue to learn from that. And of course, what the Mayor agreed recently was that we would dedicate a proportion of the Transforming Cities Fund that he was allocated in the spring to additional Metrolink rolling stock capacity and also additional park and ride capacity, picking up on the point that Councillor Sykes makes, which is absolutely right. And there's a plan for the park and ride capacity that we're just finalising internally at the moment, working with Bob and team, and we'll then be bringing that to members. The air quality monitoring point, I agree that it's regrettable that there isn't more information within the table. Separately, as members will be aware of, and I brought the reports to the last meeting, we are now ramping up significantly the range of activity in Greater Manchester to develop a fundamental clean air plan for the city region. And as part of that, there is additional air quality monitoring activity underway at the moment. So we are, that really is now seeing a step change in activity. And I think I'll leave it there, Chair.
Okay, well, I thank Nicola and Simon for their comments. Can I say to members, if any of you got other points, don't raise them now, but if you'd see Nicola or Simon after the meeting, or email them afterwards with any other points you may have. What we're asking the committee to do is note the contents of this report and to agree that the Greater Manchester Transport Strategy Progress Report be published following some of the amendments which Nicola has mentioned earlier. Is everybody agreed with that? Okay, thanks. Item 6 is the rail station accessibility, access for all submission. Bob.
Thanks, Chair. Hopefully a lot shorter report. Following July's report to this committee recommending the revised priority list, that detail has now been progressed. The criteria for the choice is described in the report and has basically been developed to get the maximum chance of success when bidding to DFT. It's a national competition that we're in amongst, so the better our chance by changing some of our criteria as discussed in the July report, the better it is for all of us. So, subject to the committee's endorsement and the final detail, the bid will be submitted on the 16th of November. Happy to take any questions.
Yeah, can I just say, you will know we agreed this report a couple of months ago in terms of priorities, so today we won't be changing the priority list, but it's quite relevant for members to take an active part in this submission, and we've asked local authorities to give us any additional evidence for our bids for any stations obviously in their area, and any public support or any friends groups or any comments like that which will help with the bidding process. Any comments from anyone?
I was just going to reinforce the point you'd made, Chair. In fact, I think the cut-off point is the 15th of November, which is next Thursday, for consultation, all right, for people being able to respond, local groups. Certainly that was in an email I received this week. So I've certainly spread the message around my area via Facebook and so on. So just encourage other members to do the same in their areas.
Councillor Robinson.
Thanks, Chair. I fully support the report and its progress through. As members will recall, I'm very passionate about accessibility. Although I would just like to point out on page 4, the downgrading of Broughbottom. The line into Manchester is the most inaccessible platform there. The nearest accessible station is Guy Bridge, which is 4 stations away, coming into Manchester. Going to the end of the line, the next one is Glossop itself, which is a single platform in and out. And if anybody knows the area, it can take you an hour to get out to Broughbottom by car. And into Glossop, you've probably got a route through Derbyshire, which is quicker than using the main road. So it's quite inaccessible because we've taken all the bus services, or virtually all the bus services away as well. But I support the report.
Okay, thanks, Peter. Any further comments or questions? Yes.
I know obviously you don't want, special lobbying for a station now. Yes, but I'm going to do it anyway. It's just the one of the criteria which I think should have been used, in addition to the ones which are, is the accessibility of other transport facilities and the length of time journeys take. And this is why I'm sort of giving a lobby for the Daisy Hill station, because it's an area where, not much to Councillor Chadwick's chagrin, there's a lot of housing being proposed, so the upturn in usage is going to be a lot higher. But also from Daisy Hill, it's a lot more inaccessible by accessible buses than sort of like Swinton, which has a much less footfall. And I think those sort of criteria should be put into the equation as well.
Don't you be having to go at Swinton. No, Councillor Anselm, you're doing what we all want to do. We've got to, I mean, by memory, there's 40-odd stations in Greater Manchester that need a better, better refurbishment for accessibility. So you're not alone in saying what you said. But, I mean, we did agree this criteria 2 months ago, and what's important today is we get this bid in and we try and get as much money as we can from this so we can do as many stations as possible. Can I ask committee, we're asking you to agree with this report, but also to delegate authority to the TFGM Chief Executive, the TFGMC Chair, in consultation with the Combined Authority Treasurer, so we could submit this bid before the deadline. Is everybody agreed with that? Okay, thank you. Item 7 is property transactions. Bob.
Thanks, Chair. Very similar report to the ones you regularly receive. Predominantly dispose of land around Metrolink Phase 3 construction, where we had to have a wider footprint during the construction period. Now that land is superfluous and it's very small pockets. There is one exception to that. That's the disposal of Hayrod Street, which is a small industrial unit that is of no use currently to TFGM.
Okay, comments or questions? Are you happy to endorse that? And bear in mind there is a part 2 element later for any detailed questions. Okay, is that agreed? Okay, item 8 is the appointment of a member to serve on the board of CLES. I think most people will know that Manchester City Council, Salford City Council and TFGM have representative on the board because we've always been involved with this organisation. What I'm moving from the chair is that we appoint the chairman, Mark Aldred, to serve as a trustee, but in his absence that I will go as a substitute if he cannot attend a meeting. Are you happy to endorse that? And we will look at it again next May and June, when the new committee meets. Okay. Item 9 is the Christmas and New Year services. Sean, I think.
Thank you, Chair. The report's in line with previous years and outlines the public transport vision over the Christmas and New Year period. From a bus point of view, TFGM will continue to work with operators all the way up to the festive period, as they can submit changes up to 21 days in advance. We have had some additional information that on Boxing Day, a number of operators are running limited services, and TFGM will make them available once we receive that information in more detail. From a Metrolink perspective, Metrolink will be in operation every day except Christmas Day, and we are looking to strengthen services for the Christmas markets and obviously the party season. There'll also be the free busing operation as well across the city centre, apart from Christmas Day. In respect to rail, it's pretty much in line with previous years, but Northern have announced that there'll be a strike day every Saturday in December, and there's also some electrification works around the Victoria area, which will affect services in and out on the 27th and 28th of December. I'm advising customers to go to Northern Rail for all available information on that. In respect of bus timetable information, it'll all be on tfgm.com and in subsequent journey planners by the 9th of December. And the team are working hard to get that available as and when we receive it. There'll also be a pocket guide available for customers as well, which the team are working on, and we'll hope to get that available and published within the next couple of weeks. Other than that, obviously the contents of the report are there for everyone to read, but we'll take questions if anyone's got any. Thank you.
Okay, Doreen.
I haven't got a question, Chairman, it's a comment. I find it appalling every single year, the rail and bus network that we have for Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve. Christmas Day, I totally accept. But Christmas Eve, New Year's Eve, festive period, we don't want people drinking and driving. And buses are finishing at 7 o'clock and rail probably 8 o'clock. I just find it absolutely appalling in this day and age. Thank you.
Anyway, Councillor Dickinson agrees with Christmas Day. That's the main thing. Doreen, I mean, I think all members of this committee should continue to urge for better services over the festive period. I think that's our job as a Transport Committee. But naturally, we're dealing with the operators and we have to negotiate with them through TFGM. But I agree with you. We've got to try and do that. Noel.
Thanks, Chair. I don't know if you'll know the answer to this, but I'll ask you a question anyway. The app that, for example, First have, I know it's problematic, but what tends to happen on a bank holiday is that it just goes to the normal Monday timetable. So will the changes be reflected in the TFGM app, which presumably takes its data from the First app or Arriva or Stagecoach or whatever else? So that's what I'd like to know. Thank you.
Yeah, so the work that we're doing with the network team at TFGM, we'll basically release the relevant information that First provide us through the national data set, and then we then consume that back into my TFGM journey planner. So subject to First giving us the right information for that day, the right information will be displayed on tfgm.com and in the my TFGM journey planner.
Through you, Chair, how confident are you that First and the other operators are going to provide the appropriate information, given that it's supposed to run in real time, but in actuality it doesn't always?
Sorry. Speaking to the team actually yesterday on this point, we've actually got pretty much most of the information coming through from First now, but I will take that particular point you've said around the bank holiday services to make sure that we are absolutely confident it will be reflected in the journey planner. But by the 9th of December, all that information will be available, so I advise anyone to check from that date onwards.
Councillor Dickinson.
Yes, Chairman. I'm just wondering, when we get this franchising, which I've lobbied a long time for, and hopefully it'll come soon, will we have the powers then to make bus operators do later bus services or on Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve?
If it goes to a franchise package, then we're able to specify what services we require.
Okay. Agree we note that report. Who said that? Steve, sorry, Councillor Adson.
I did have my hand up, obviously, so I was just probably just out of your corner there. So it's just a comment, Jan, I mean, obviously, welcome last comment, obviously, that we can have the powers to do it, but I mean, I think one of the problems associated with that as well, of course, it's actually the funding that goes with it. I mean, I was going to comment generally about if we had the resources that London Transport have, we could provide proper full services throughout the festive period. I mean, I worked in the NHS for 21 years, and there's many staff work on Christmas Day. Now, there is no public transport on Christmas Day, and that causes enormous problems for planning for the NHS. You know, but that's the way it is. You know, I mean, I think that the funding is what it is, even though austerity is over, I believe, in that sense of it. You know, but seriously, I mean, I think that London have a massive advantage over us, and if we're going to try and get people to actually take more advantage of public transport. I mean, I particularly notice in my own area, things like the Metrolink finishes at 9 AM on Christmas Eve. Now, that's not particularly incentive for people to travel about up and down the Metrolink line and maybe come into Manchester for a meal and meet with friends. So, I mean, I think I accept that situation as it is now with the funding and so forth and our powers. But obviously, when we get to the future, I really hope we can. And it's one of the things I'll be working for, along with yourself and other colleagues here, to make sure we do get that improvement. Thank you.
Well, you're certainly right that subsidy makes a big difference. There's no doubt about that. Okay, I ask you to note that report. Is that agreed? Item 10 is register of key decisions, which is there for information. Item 11 is exclusion of the press and public, if somebody will move the appropriate resolution. That's moved. Seconded. Is that agreed? Okay, we'll just wait.